a third of the planet's population that was infected. It was 500 million people that were infected at that point. 675,000 Americans died at that point. So inevitably, your mind kind of goes back to what's happened in the past, because as humans, we always look back to history to try and predict the future. It doesn't always work. It's not always prophetic, but it does give you something of what to kind of play out if this were to get worse and worse. Now, Andrew brought up the idea that it's warm weather. We're approaching spring in a lot of parts of the country, or a lot of parts of the planet. That may be good news. We just don't know if this time around, if this is one of those viruses that does die off in warmer weather. Wait and see and kind of hope.
स्टॉक मार्केट रिलेटेड इंटरव्यू वीडियो पाने के लिए मेरे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन को दबा दें.
From what I've heard from people that know a lot more about viruses than I do, that unfortunately this will make it through the summer, and in terms of having a vaccine, it's a long ways off. So you've got it is scary stuff. I don't think it should affect what you do in stocks, but in terms of the human race, it's scary stuff when you have a pandemic.
Yeah, I guess this one's particularly frightening because it's new. So there's no natural immunity that's built up in any of the populations. And you wonder what happens, particularly in areas where there's not the same healthcare structure that we have in America or in some of the developed nations. I guess that's a big part of the question, too.
Yeah, and it's well, I think about it in terms of our annual meeting. I mean, which is May 2nd. I mean, it could very well affect, by that time, it could affect.
We got questions from viewers asking just that. Will the annual meeting be any different this year, particularly because you have a large Chinese contingency of shareholders who come here for that?
Yeah, and that certainly will be affected. And incidentally, I mean, flu is particularly tough on old people. Yeah, you're going to have two guys on the stage whose combined age is 185. So we won't be looking for people that are showing any signs of contagion. But that's one of the problems with this, is it does have a long gestation period,
right.
And it's highly transmissible.
And again, you did talk about it earlier. It's something that you see in the results of the businesses, even some of your own fully owned businesses that you didn't anticipate.
Well, and we own airlines, for example. No, it affects businesses. Now, actually, my dad used to tell me stories. He was 14 in 1918, and he told me what went on in Omaha, during the big Spanish flu epidemic. I mean, it was something in those days, and pandemics will occur in the future. Now, what they hope to get is a universal flu vaccine, but that's a long way off. It isn't impossible. I mean, I asked my own science advisor is Bill Gates, so I talked to him. I call him. I've talked to him the last few days about it, and he's bullish on the long-term outlook for a universal prevention of it. But he says it's not going to come, it's not going to be here in 10 years.
What are Bill's concerns as somebody who spends a lot of time traveling around the globe, as somebody who is trying to help medicine in some of the less developed parts of the world?
Yeah, the Gates Foundation is very active in trying to be helpful on this, and Bill says the CDC is the best in the world, and I mean, we've got terrific resources in this country, but a pandemic is a pandemic, and there's just no evaluating. But I have heard that the summer is not likely to cause the end of this.
Do you know why?
But I don't know, and you shouldn't be asking. I shouldn't be offering my opinion on that, because I pass along things I hear from people I think are smart, but
I'm actually asking for Bill's opinion, not yours.
Yeah, well, I shouldn't really quote him, but I do. He's the guy I ask, and I did talk to him just a few days ago, and he loves to talk science, and he can make it so I can understand it, which is quite a trick. At the Gates Foundation, they're taking it very seriously, I'll put it that way.
Is money going from the Gates Foundation to try and find a vaccine?
I'm sure we're expending human and financial resources.
I mean, maybe this is more than you know, but you know if they have put human resources out either into China or other places where there's...
I don't know that. I don't want to comment on that, but I know that that is something they've always spent. They've been very involved in, is human health, and even particularly this. Bill knows a lot about vaccines.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Berkshire Hathaway. We were in the middle of a conversation when we had to go to a break before, but there has been this question raised, not only by Barron's in the cover story there, but by other places too, about whether Berkshire Hathaway would be worth more if it were split up.
It's a good question, and I will tell you that if you were to say, and let's say the stock market didn't change for 2 years and interest rates didn't change, so you had a 2-year period and you said, we'll sell off all the businesses. I don't think, I mean, you have the expenses of selling them. Now, if you sold them all to people who leveraged them up to their maximum, you might get a little more than the stock is selling for. It would be very tax inefficient, very tax inefficient. Interestingly enough, up till 1986, it wouldn't have been. I mean, there was a general utilities doctrine that governed corporate breakups. And so you could dispose of businesses or securities, if you did it right, you could dispose of securities or businesses that had appreciated without a tax at the corporate level. That was done regularly in various ways up till 1986. They revised the tax code big time. They killed general utilities. You can't do that now. Now you can have spin-offs, this business or that business. You probably have to lie a little in terms of your purpose in order to get the best tax ruling. And it takes time, but you cannot break up, you cannot dispose of the entire business, business by business, without having very substantial tax liability. It would not produce a gain. On the other hand, having them together produces, there's some very valuable synergies in there. Now, we don't use leverage as much as the people who would buy them piece by piece would do. So we could leverage Berkshire up to the sky. I've promised people we won't, because we have insurance promises to people out 50 or 100 years, and we've got shareholders who are going to own the stock for 50 years, and they do not want us to leverage to the sky. But there would not be a profit if we were simply to announce that over the next 24 months that you could come in and buy any business we had and we'd sell them to the highest bidder.
You made a point of talking about this in the annual letter.
Yeah.
You said, key to my Berkshire-only institutions is my faith in the future judgment and fidelity of Berkshire directors. They will regularly be tested by Wall Streeters bearing fees. At many companies, these super salesmen might win. I do not, however, expect this to happen.
That's exactly true. And I think by writing it, it helps it a little, too. No, there's no question that Wall Street would love to come along and sell anything that we've got. I mean, there's a fee every time that there's a transaction, and they're big fees, and there's fees for financing. I mean, so we've had all kinds of people snoop around that. And they know they're not getting it done with me, but it won't get done later on either. I am leaving every share of Berkshire I have goes to charity, and it's 99% of my net worth. So nobody cares more than I do about getting the most money to those philanthropies over the years following my death. And that's going to take place over 15 years. And I say keep it all in Berkshire. But if I thought that it was going to be run in a way responsive to Wall Street, I would instead do something else and have the money distributed to these philanthropies and not have it all tied to Berkshire. But Berkshire has a very unusual shareholder base. I mean, we have individuals that own Berkshire, and a lot of them have owned it 50 years just like it. It's people buy it to own for a lifetime, and we're going to run it in a way that they won't be disappointed.
Do you think the people who are relatively newer shareholders buying the B shares have the same mentality as the people who have been in it for 50 years in the A?
Well, we try to,
shares?
because that's who we encourage. I mean, in effect, we don't want everybody to buy our stock. I mean, there's only so many seats. There's about 1,600,000 and some thousand A shares out. All the seats are filled. I love the shareholders we have. I don't want to go to Wall Street and try and get some new shareholders. They're going to replace the people we have. So what we want to have is people in those seats that are in sync with us. You can run a French restaurant or you can run a hamburger stand. And if you serve good hamburgers, you'll do good business at the hamburger stand. You can, at the French restaurant, you do the same thing there. But you can't run the French restaurant and then serve hamburgers inside. And you can't run the hamburger stand and serve French food inside. So we advertise in our deeds, in our words, in every way we can what we're about. And we're looking to have the seats filled at our church by people who are in sync with us, and we do have them there. We get the same people every Sunday. And I see no advantage in going out and telling everybody in Wall Street we're going to do wonderful things and having those seats replaced, because the only way you can get a seat is to throw somebody else out of that seat. There's only so many seats and they're all full, and you want them filled with people who are in sync with the policies of the company, and therefore you have to explain those policies and you have to live up to those policies, and for 55 years we've tried to.
So you get the shareholders you deserve.
Exactly.
All right, not to mix metaphors, but can you have a decentralized central office running both the French restaurant and the hamburger place?
Well, we're not trying to have the railroad management run the utility or anything.
No, decentralized, that's what I mean. A decentralized headquarters that's in charge, a conglomerate in charge of all those different businesses.
Well, we could run, we have decentralized management as it is. We could have somebody in charge of all the little companies, another one for the big. I mean, we could divisionalize it in all kinds of ways. I think we'd have more overhead. I think we'd have a different sort of manager. Our managers like running their own businesses, and they never have to finance their businesses. I mean, they never have to go to Wall Street. They probably save 25% of their time, and I want them to feel they own their businesses, and that's all they're responsible for. If we mess up some other way, they get paid based on how they do, and there again, we attract managers who like to operate on that basis. We don't attract managers, particularly who think they're going to keep moving step by step through various divisions and eventually run the whole place.
One of the things that people wrote in, a lot of people had questions about the banks, about what's happening with the banks, what you've changed with some of your investments over time. Jason Goldberg writes in, he says, please ask Warren about his views on the bank stocks in general and on Wells Fargo in particular. Over the last 2 quarters, he sold almost a quarter of his longstanding Wells Fargo stake. Also in the fourth quarter, he dumped a third of his Goldman Sachs shares, although he still owns over $75 billion in bank equities. So what do you think about banks? Not necessarily the sell-off today, because you don't look at day by day.
Well, banking is a good business if you don't do dumb things on the asset side. I mean, basically. And it's a business that the banks we own earn between, the commercial banks earn between 12% and 16% or so on net tangible assets. That's a good business. It's a fantastic business against the long-term bond, at 2%. If you have a choice between a 2% instrument and a 12% instrument, which one's going to win over time? So if you ask me whether I think banks are going to go down where they only earn 3 or 4% on tangible assets, I don't think that'll happen. The question is really whether they do something massively dumb. I mean, which periodically a number of banks have done, and I feel very good about the banks we own. They're very attractive compared to most other securities I see, and most of them are buying. Bank of America is buying in a lot of stock every year. So our ownership of the Bank of America this year probably will go up 7 or 8% without us spending a dime. I'd like to own any business, any good business, where my ownership goes up 7 or 8% every year without me spending any money, and on top of it, I get a dividend and so on. They're very attractive, both against interest rates and against bonds and against other stocks, in my view.
You say occasionally they do dumb things. Maybe you're talking about Wells Fargo with the scandal that it had. It just settled on Friday with a number of the regulatory institutions that were kind of looking into it, the investigations that were taking place for $3 billion.
Yeah.
Does this mean that they have kind of finally gotten through that and can move forward?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that they paid $3 billion because it was announced. I don't know what else is outstanding. But Wells Fargo is classic in terms of one lesson. My partner, Charlie Munger, he says, whenever we have a problem, you attack it immediately. He says an ounce of prevention is not worth a pound of cure. An ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. And we've seen that time after time. And the interesting thing, and I don't know the details at all, but the original thing was a whole bunch of phony accounts. Now, I don't know how, if you open up a couple million phony accounts, you make any money on it at all. I mean, the shareholders didn't make money. People say that, well,
the incentive structure was set up so that some of the employees
it was the
didn't
dumbest
make much money.
incentive system you can think. And as soon as you learn, you can devise dumb incentive systems. We've done them ourselves. I mean, you can cause people to do the wrong thing because they will do what they're incented to do. And they had obviously a very dumb incentive system. People started playing it various ways. And the big thing is they ignored it when they found out about it. I mean, you're going to do dumb things in business, and we do them every day, you know. But you absolutely have to attack a problem as soon as it occurs, and you know about it. And if that had happened, Wells Fargo shareholders would be a lot better off. But Wells Fargo shareholders did not profit from opening up accounts that were phony accounts that had nothing in them. I mean, somebody was getting paid so much per account. And the practice spread, because bad practices do spread if they're allowed to spread. And they were ignored, which is a total disaster. And look at the consequences. So 2 or 3 years later, who's paying? The shareholders are paying for something that didn't do them any good whatsoever.
Is that why you've sold off some of the shares?
No, not specifically.
I know you don't want to get specific on why.
Yeah, no, I'm not recommending it. It's what stocks, people have to make up their own minds on that. But,
okay. I want to ask you a question about Todd Combs and his new role at GEICO. I got several questions that came in from that, and let's just use this one from Peter Lampras. During last year's interview on CNBC, after the 2018 letter was released, you were asked about succession at GEICO, and you mentioned that at a recent meeting at GEICO, you met about 40 of their top executives, and after each introduced themselves, they stated their length of time with the company. The shortest was 19 years. Please explain why none of these 40 top executives were qualified to take over as CEO after the retirement of Bill Roberts. Again, that's Pete Lampras from Chicago.
Yeah, Bill Roberts took over not even 2 years ago, and he has done a terrific job in connection with Tony Nicely. I mean, GEICO is my first love, absolutely. I tell the other companies that you can compete for my second love, but you can't compete for my first love, which is GEICO, because it goes back 69 years, and it did wonders for me. Anyway, GEICO, Bill Roberts took over a little less than 2 years ago, and then in either October or November last year, he said he'd like to retire in a year. He would adjust it in any way that made it the easiest for us. And we did not have the person, in my view, to replace him at that point. And Todd Combs, who's worked with Berkshire now for 10 years, he actually was a product manager at Progressive in the past, and he knows a lot about insurance. Insurance is probably the only business I know something about that we're in. All the rest of them are total confusion. But I understand the insurance business to some degree. Todd understands it very well at the operating level. And so Todd is there, and I hope very much that he's not there very long, because I'd like to get him back to Omaha. But our intention always is to promote from within, and we would hope to pick out the right person at GEICO. It isn't that there isn't somebody there, it's just you want to have the right one, because when you put somebody in, you're going to keep them there for a long time, or her. And